Imagine if you're a toy designer in Hasbro in the early 80s, tasked with making up a new combat-themed toy line on an extremely limited budget. And despite your maximum effort, the best you can come up with was a bunch of mostly bland green army men. But to everyone's surprise, the line turns out to be a breakout hit with the kiddies. And so on the second year, you're given a significant increase in budget to produce even more characters, with basically the sky as your limit. So what would you do? Despite its rather humble and modest beginnings, the G.I. Joe Real American Hero toy line was pretty much a runaway success right out of the gate. So much so that you could see the stark contrast between the first batch of Joes released in 1982 and the next wave the following year. It was like day and night. It was pretty clear that the designers got a significant bump in their design budget, allowing them to come up with even more unique tooling. And with that, they were able to expand G.I. Joe's reach to other environments like in the snow or under the water, as well as give us even more specialized soldiers like a mine detector, medic, and cowboy. Anyway, and of course, they were able to give other branches of the US military representation in America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. And by that, I'm referring to the very first official G.I. Joe Marine, Gung Ho. So to a 7-year-old boy at the time, right off the bat, Gung Ho was a definite head-scratcher for me. I honestly didn't know what to make of him. I mean, he definitely looked imposing with his rather large frame, thick mustache, and most importantly, bare arms and bare tattooed chest. I mean, this guy looked like he could take on the entire first wave of the Joes all by himself. And yet, he was dressed in a mostly light powder blue uniform, which kinda made him less intimidating. I just couldn't really decide if he was cool or not, scary or funny. And his code name, Gung Ho, didn't help me out either. What was that all about? Well, it could have been worse, I guess, as they could have dressed him up in black and given him a leather jacket and placed him on a squad with a Native American construction worker. Okay, let's not go there. Sorry. Moving on, Gung Ho's file card just added to my confusion, as before joining the military, Gung Ho worked in a car manufacturing plant in Pennsylvania that was bought out and taken over by a major Japanese company, Asan Motors Corporation. Oh wait, that's the wrong Gung Ho. Sorry, my bad. Good movie though, from what I remember. Anyway, so before joining the Marines at the tender age of 18, G.I. Joe's Gung Ho had already gained quite the reputation of being a very formidable bare-knuckle brawler and knife fighter from a large back swamp Cajun clan. Now you have to understand, aside from being a little kid, I was Asian, and so the term Cajun was pretty much alien to me, especially its exotic-sounding birthplace of Fur-de-Lance, Louisiana, which apparently doesn't even exist. Yup, Gung Ho holds the distinction of being the only Joe to come from a fictional birthplace. So back then, my only takeaways from Gung Ho's file card was that this guy was from the swamp and was described by fellow Joe Zap as the hairiest, scariest, craziest jarhead that ever scratched, kicked, and bit his way out of that hole in the swamp they call Paris Island. So yeah, and with an exotic name like Ettienne R. LaFitte, I actually thought the dude was straight up French. Well, to be fair, Louisiana is known for its significant French heritage. Fortunately, I guess the writers of the cartoon probably figured that the Gung Ho character as presented in the toy and file card was a bit much for the kiddies, and so it seemed that there was a deliberate effort to kinda soften up Gung Ho in the show. Sure, he was still portrayed as an unusually strong and sometimes short-tempered individual, but was also given a more down-to-earth and almost childlike personality, known for cooking up his infamous gumbo stew that I grew up thinking was an awful dish. It's actually quite delicious, as well as cozying up with Cobra Commander in his arms and playing with miniature toy tanks. Basically, par for the course for 80s cartoon strongman stereotypes. That being said, I do think they went a little overboard with softening up his appearance in the show. Like, did he literally fashion his vest out of a tablecloth? I mean, a few more details like pockets wouldn't have hurt. Anyway, the cartoon even went as far as introducing his extended family in the episode Captives of Cobra, where the Baroness brings a troop of Cobra soldiers to the swamps of Fer-de-Lance to kidnap Gung Ho's family. Unfortunately for her, Gung Ho's family consists of a 130-plus member clan who are quite capable of taking care of themselves, and make short work of the Baroness's men and offer her some gumbo. And we meet their family pet alligator, little Shoo, and their matriarch, a sweet, feisty little old lady. Curiously, despite being Cajun, who are descendants of French Canadians and known for speaking an archaic form of French, in the cartoon, Gung Ho, voiced by the legendary Chris Latta, the man behind iconic characters like Cobra Commander and Starscream, spoke in a southern accent. Anyway, while I can't really pinpoint specific episodes where Gung Ho was front and center, he was a perennial presence right up until the 1987 animated movie, where he, along with fellow Joes Bazooka and Alpine, played a small but important part guarding the Cobra Emperor Serpentor, who the Joes held prisoner. The three Joes served as the last line of defense against the Dreadnoks and the monstrous Nemesis Enforcer, who ended up making short work of Gung Ho and company in the process of breaking out Serpentor. And while he was seriously injured from that encounter, thankfully Gung Ho survived. I guess it goes with the territory, as with great strength comes great injury, as was shown in the Marvel and British Action Force comics, where Gung Ho was the unfortunate recipient not once, but twice of the sharp end of the Cobra Ninja Storm Shadow's sword. Fortunately for Gung Ho, he managed to survive both encounters. Which brings us to the comics, where Gung Ho's depiction was a little bit more closer to the original character. At least in the earlier issues, Gung Ho was more serious and intense, and he did speak with a proper Cajun accent. His colors were also somewhat muted down as well, with a darker, more greenish tone, but I guess giving him a more standard uniform was still off limits to Hama and company. But to be fair to Hama, he did point out the unconventional look of Gung Ho's uniform in issue 11, titled The Pipeline Ploy, where the Marine, along with fellow 1983 wavemates Snowjob, Doc, and Airborne, made their official debuts as new recruits to the team. As the story goes, OG machine gunner Rock'n'Roll immediately points out the silliness of Gung Ho's choice of attire, especially since the entire issue takes place in the Alaskan tundra. But to his credit, Gung Ho doesn't retaliate and simply proves his worth and gains Rock'n'Roll's admiration when he single-handedly charges into an armed Cobra squad and takes them out all by himself. It's also worth noting that Gung Ho apparently has a high-fashion model sister, as mentioned by Snowjob to Rock'n'Roll. In the end, Rock'n'Roll offers to celebrate their victory by taking Gung Ho and his sister out, to which Gung Ho angrily states that his sister is actually just 9 years old, a little detail that Snowjob conveniently left out. Oh, and speaking of odd inconsistencies, while it was eventually corrected later on, despite his original figure being obviously bald, Gung Ho in the comics actually had a full set of hair. I'm thinking it was once again an attempt to line him up better with his file card's description of being the hairiest, scariest, craziest jarhead. Well, you know the rest. Sorry, extreme tangent here, but when my daughter was around 4, she would often tell me of her dreams of battling bad guys by flattening them, stuffing them in a jar, and throwing them down a river. Should I be worried? Well, I'll tell you what I'm not worried about, and that would not be left wanting for awesome viewers like all of you out there. Thank you for the engagement, for all the likes, comments, shares, and subs. All of it just makes me gung-ho to tell even more stories. And if you haven't done any of these yet, that's cool. There's always time to make up for that. But seriously, thank you for all your support. Anyway, back to Gung Ho. So in what I'm assuming was the Christmas of 1986, I received a special gift from my brother. An awesome gift actually that at first glance I thought was a Star Wars figure, until I realized that this predominantly silvery, futuristic looking dude was actually the Cobra Commander, battle armor style. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, after getting over my initial shock, I quickly turned the card over to see all the new Joes and Cobras that were coming out in the next year, and almost immediately, I noticed that they were not all there. This must have been an extremely early release, as while there was a bunch of cool new looking characters shown, there were also a good number not, as in covered up with an explosive graphic labeled "Coming Soon." To their credit, Hasbro did throw us a bone by revealing their names, and the one name that I was most excited to read was, ironically, a familiar one: Gung Ho. Now, despite his rather confusing introduction, by this time, Gung Ho had become one of my favorite characters, and so I was really stoked to see him not forgotten and being given a second chance to shine. Unfortunately, when I finally saw the new version of Gung Ho a few months later, I was still confused. Look, despite being a Joe fan, I have never been that knowledgeable about real-world military terminology, and so Marine dress blues basically flew over my head. While this was meant to be Gung Ho in a more formal and ceremonial iconic uniform of the United States Marine Corps, with all due respect to real Marines and viewers who served in the military out there, as a kid with no real-world knowledge of dress blues, this Gung Ho looked rather bland to me. I mean, how could Gung Ho charge into battle with this formal attire and no weapon? I mean, he had a sword, but even back then I could see that it was sheathed. Anyway, it's only as an adult that I learned to properly appreciate this very unique release, and in retrospect, it might have been a cool idea to release more Joes back in the day in ceremonial gear. In any case, it wouldn't be long before a more battle-ready Gung Ho would return in 1992, back with his signature open-chested, exposed tattoo look and a light-colored lime green top and light tan pants combo. He did ditch his hat though, which I felt was kind of an intrinsic part of his look. As per Hasbro artist Ron Rudat, Gung Ho's original look was based on his father and uncle, both Marines, and his father wore a similar hat. But on the bright side, he did come with an extremely oversized machine gun. I mean, seriously, I think it was even taller than him, a spring-loaded rocket launcher, and an American flag, to make it clear that he was a real American hero. I'm assuming that this figure sold pretty well, as the following year it was straight up repainted and re-released under the Battle Corps subline. But as exciting as those versions of Gung Ho were, I would have to say that apart from his original figure, his last release in the original American Hero toy line would have to be Gung Ho's best one yet. I mean, no longer just a Marine, Gung Ho was now a MAGA Marine. Oops, sorry, I meant Mega Marine. And the commander of the rest of the Mega Marines, no less. And equipped with his special Mega Marine Bio Armor, i.e. Play-Doh, this Gung Ho was all about busting up some mega monsters. And of course, what would Gung Ho be without any brightly colored duds? Well, this one didn't disappoint, coming in very bright lemon yellow gear. Okay, I guess you're thinking I'm being a bit sarcastic with my delivery, but seriously, from the swamps of Louisiana to commanding his own bio-armored brigade, that's quite a step up for Gung Ho, who by this time had most likely become one of the most iconic Joes from the line, period. How iconic, you may ask? Well, in 2007, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Real American Hero line, Hasbro released 2 commemorative 5-figure packs of newly designed and engineered 1/18th scale action figures, one for G.I. Joe and one for Cobra. And given that it had been 14 years since the original line had ended, you can imagine how big a deal this was for G.I. Joe fans. And for the good guys, do you know who made the cut? Well, the usual suspects: Duke, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Roadblock, and Gung Ho. Yup, the original mustachioed Marine in all his open-chested tattooed and powder blue uniforms and grenade-launching glory. And while these sets were meant to be just one-off releases, just like the original line in 1982, they ended up being a big-time hit with collectors, opening the door for a full-blown 25th anniversary line, where Gung Ho got a couple more figures. That original pack release was eventually given a darker green repaint and sold in a comic 2-pack with an updated Battle Armor Cobra Commander, which I'm guessing was an homage to his early Marvel Comics look, sans the hair. Otherwise, a cool callback to the connection I have with this version of Cobra Commander that I received for Christmas all those years ago with Gung Ho. The next year, a slightly tweaked version of Gung Ho was released as part of the toy line for the live-action G.I. Joe movie, The Rise of Cobra. While Gung Ho wasn't featured in the movie, it was heavily rumored that the actor Brendan Fraser, who made a cameo as an unnamed G.I. Joe drill instructor, was supposed to be Gung Ho, or that he wanted to be, I believe. But in the end, he was turned to stone. Sergeant Stone, that is. Anyway, like I said, this Gung Ho wasn't that different from the classic look, except now, he was a little bit more conservative, with an undershirt, closed-up vest, and a slightly more muted blue. A far cry from the movie aesthetic, which had the team dressed in mostly black bodysuits. But you know what this Gung Ho did closely resemble? his look from the cartoon microseries G.I. Joe Resolute, which came out the same year. Coincidence? I think not. For those not in the know, Resolute was a more mature animated version of G.I. Joe, you know, where actual characters were killed and entire countries vaporized. And Gung Ho was one of the more featured Joes in the series, playing two crucial parts. First, working with the support staff that featured a weirdly gender-swapped dial tone in figuring out how to take down Cobra's new Stratolite weapon system. And secondly, joining a strike team composed of himself, Roadblock, and the two Rangers, Stalker and Beachhead, assigned with rescuing a group of scientists taken hostage by Destro and the Baroness. Practicing the clarinet! Sorry, I couldn't help it. Anyway, while these modern versions of Gung Ho were
pretty good,
they all had two major flaws. First was that his damn tattoo kept changing from figure to figure, and in one case literally transferred from his chest to his arm. To be fair, his tattoo, which was supposed to be the US Marines logo, is copyrighted, so Hasbro had to do some creative tweaking. But if they cared, they could have at least kept it consistent from figure to figure. But as a non-military collector, that's just a little nitpick for me. The real issue was that all these Gung Hos were sorely undersized and, well, skinny. And so, before the 1/18th scale Joe line went to bed again for another extended hiatus, Hasbro did us a solid by giving us one more newly sculpted and, more importantly, appropriately sized Gung Ho. And yeah, as far as this scale is concerned, it's the definitive classic Gung Ho. Oh, Haya. No, wait, I said classic version, so Haya Toys doesn't count. Great figure though. In any case, once Hasbro was done with the 1/18th scale, so was I. And it may have taken a while and a whole lot of denial on my part, but I eventually followed them into the larger 1/12th scale with their excellent G.I. Joe classified line, where Gung Ho didn't just get one, but two figures. The first one was released quite early on in the line when Hasbro was still on the let's make a super modern bordering on futuristic version of Joes to appeal to all those Fortnite-obsessed Gen Z kids. And with that in mind, this is what we got. Still pretty good if you ask me, and for those who care, sporting a little more hair on top, reminding me a bit of former professional MMA fighter Chuck Liddell. Hey, wait a minute. I rest my case. So, random fact, this was the very first G.I. Joe classic figure that I got. Ever. But not for the reasons you might think. I was still in my I'm not collecting classified denial stage, and I only got this Gung Ho so I could pop off his Chuck Liddell head and replace it with a Marvel Legends one to give me another Cyborg Reaver for my collection. But eventually, Hasbro got me, and by that time, a more traditional looking retro-styled Gung Ho had been released. Still with the wrong tattoo though, but whatever. And had become one of the most highly sought out figures, at least here in Manila. Fortunately, after a couple of failed attempts to get him from some suspect Chinese online stores, I managed to score a great deal off on eBay auction and finally got a proper powder blue marine in my classified collection. But we're not done yet, apparently. I do have one more Gung Ho in my collection worth mentioning, and that would be the Super 7 Ultimates version that is based on his Sunbow cartoon look. Like, completely based on it, down to his tablecloth constructed vest and little toy tank. And speaking of that little tank, did you know that it's based on an actual G.I. Joe vehicle? The missile-firing Wolverine, released the same year as Gung Ho along with its equally popular driver, the former supermodel Courtney Krieger. If you want to know more about Gung Ho's fellow wavemate, better known as Cover Girl, I've got you covered here. Or if you want other G.I. Joe stories, you can check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.